Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the programme that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. On the programme this week, conflicts in Gaza and Sudan weigh heavily on Muslims marking Eid al-Adha. Muslims around the world this week celebrated Eid al-Adha, the feast of sacrifice. But in Gaza, which aid groups say is on the brink of famine, food is hard to come by this year, let alone meat. The Muslim holiday typically involves slaughtering an animal for food for loved ones and the needy. But many in Gaza are going hungry as Israel's offensive continues. Surrounded by destruction and rubble, dozens of Palestinian Muslims gathered in Khan Yunis on Sunday to perform the congressional Eid al-Adha prayer. Muslims celebrate the day with the ritual killing of a sheep, goat or cow as a symbol of sacrifice. But this year, Palestinians across Gaza are facing famine-like conditions.
السنوات الماضية كانت عندنا أضاحي كثيرة الحمد لله رب العالمين. أما العيد الحالي لا في ضحايا ولا في أي شيء والحمد لله على كل حال. إن شاء الله هيك ربنا العيد القادم ينصرنا وإن شاء الله يفرجها عن جميع المسلمين والمسلمات. السنوات الماضية كانت عندنا أضاحي كثيرة الحمد لله رب العالمين. أما العيد الحالي لا في ضحايا ولا في أي شيء والحمد لله على كل حال. إن شاء الله هيك ربنا العيد القادم ينصرنا وإن شاء الله يفرجها عن جميع المسلمين والمسلمات.
والله الشعور لا يوصف صراحة يعني شعور مليء بالأحزان.
In previous years, there were rallies of children walking around the whole district. Children used to roam the streets everywhere. The streets were bustling with worshippers, but now we've lost them, and these houses have turned into rubble.
ما فيش له عيلة يعيد معهم كم من نساء أرامل الأبناء الأيتام.
Hunger has gripped the Palestinian territory as Israel has unleashed an 8-month military offensive on the enclave and severely restricted what is allowed to enter, including humanitarian aid. The UN World Food Programme warned this past week that southern Gaza could see the catastrophic levels of hunger previously experienced by Gazans in the north of the territory. More than 50,000 children in the Gaza Strip require immediate medical treatment for acute malnutrition, according to the United Nations.
طفل أمجد القانوع البالغ من العمر 3 سنوات وزنه الصحي 5 كيلو أمجد تعرض لسوء تغذية بشكل حاد وكمان يعني أدى عنده لأمراض اللي هو مرض البارتر سيندروم هو عبارة عن نقص في الصوديوم وفي البوتاسيوم. هذا سببه كله قلة التغذية وقلة الغذاء الصحي والمية الصحية وقلة
Most hospitals in Gaza are partially functioning and operating under severe limitations. Due to the dire situation, many of them are on the verge of collapse or have been forced to close.
The humanitarian situation is really bad. There's a significant shortage in food and supplies, and for the medical situation it's very bad. There's very poor availability of medical supplies. The staff, the local staff, nurses and physicians are exhausted after 9 months of extensive war and extensive injuries. We hope our presence here, as you can see, the electricity keeps shutting down. We hope our presence here would help the local staff to alleviate some of their basically problems and help them within the available resources. There's a very urgent needs for people and NGOs to come to the north of Gaza because of the type of injuries that we're seeing, the type of cases that we're seeing.
This is Al-Aqsa Hospital. Before the war, it served an estimated 150 inpatients daily. Now it says it sees around 700 patients.
The situation here is a complete disaster. I can't describe enough how disastrous this situation is. It's a small hospital. It can't handle this load. Go outside and take a look. The hospital's front door, it's packed with injured people. The emergency room is packed. The street right in front of the hospital is packed with people, and they're all injured. There's no space for them inside the hospitals.
Since the war began on October the 7th, after the Hamas-led attack on Israel, that Israel estimates killed 1,200 people, Gazans have endured intense regular bombardments. More than 37,000 people have been killed so far. On Sunday, the Israeli military announced a daily pause in military operations near a southern Gaza border crossing in order to allow more aid to enter the territory, although it was not immediately clear whether many more supplies would get in. This was after the Israeli military stepped up its attacks as Eid arrived. 10 soldiers were killed on Saturday, the deadliest for Israel since January. And for the second year, thousands of people in Sudan have also celebrated Eid without the usual joy of celebration, as the traditional rituals are becoming unaffordable during a civil war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, and collapsed the economy. While Eid al-Adha is usually embraced with delight by everyone in Sudan, this year, scattered families are struggling to celebrate as the brutal war continues. Bitter fighting between the forces of two rival generals has laid waste to much of the country. Thousands have been killed and 10 million people have been driven from their homes, creating the world's largest displacement crisis, according to the United Nations Migration Agency. And as the fighting has spread, homes and aid camps have been burned out by fires that have been allegedly started intentionally.
Sudan is being destroyed in front of our eyes by two warring parties and affiliated groups. They have stoked interethnic tensions, denied humanitarian assistance, arrested human rights defenders, and flagrantly cast aside the rights of their own people. I put both generals on notice for their own responsibility in the commission of possible war crimes and other atrocity crimes, including through sexual violence and ethnically motivated attacks. They are ultimately responsible for the impact of their actions on civilians, including massive displacement, impending famine, and an intensifying humanitarian disaster. It is vital that ongoing mediation efforts, including by the African Union, bring this conflict to an end.
El Fasher, home to 1.5 million people and the only city still under army control in the entire Darfur region, has become the focal point of the latest fighting between the army and the Rapid Support Forces. More than 130,000 residents have fled the city due to violence between April and May. The UN Security Council last week adopted a UK-drafted resolution demanding an immediate end to the fighting and withdrawal of all troops from the city.
The adoption of this resolution sends a clear message. The Council demands that the Rapid Support Forces immediately stop the siege of El Fasher and that all sides step back from the brink. An attack on the city would be catastrophic for the 1.5 million people sheltering in the city. We tabled this resolution to help secure a localised ceasefire around El Fasher and create the wider conditions to support de-escalation across the country and ultimately save lives. Civilians need to be allowed to leave the city should they wish, and aid needs to get in. President, the situation in Sudan is desperate, and the humanitarian needs of Sudan's population are severe, particularly across Darfur. This resolution underlines the need for full, rapid, safe, and unhindered cross-border and cross-line humanitarian access. It calls on the Sudanese authorities to increase cooperation with UN agencies and to urgently reopen the Adre border to help facilitate a significant scale-up of humanitarian assistance.
Together to call on all member states to refrain from external interference in this conflict, which, if it continues, will only foment further instability. And we came together to call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, leading to a sustainable resolution to this conflict. I want to take this opportunity to thank the United Kingdom as the penholder for getting this across the finish line. Thank you. This resolution could not come at a more precarious moment. The people of El Fasher are trapped. They're surrounded by heavily armed RSF. Food, water, medicine, and other essentials are drying up. Famine is setting in, and the threat of further violence, including a large-scale massacre, looms large. Already hundreds have been killed and scores have been wounded in Al Fasher. Villages have been razed to the ground. Hospitals have been bombed and looted. Humanitarian aid has been cut off. The noose of war is tightening on the Sudanese people. Right now, over 25 million people in Sudan are in dire need of humanitarian assistance and protection. Over 25 million. Sudan has become far and away the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And yet, for so long, the international community has overlooked this catastrophe. The Sudanese people have noticed.
With much of the world's attention focused on Gaza, the scene of another human-made famine, the United Nations warns that Sudan is already the worst humanitarian crisis in the world and is slipping towards a humanitarian disaster of historic proportions with far less media coverage and global concern. A UN humanitarian appeal for the country has received only 16% of the funds it needs.
Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with 12 million people displaced, 10 million internally, while 2 million have fled to neighboring countries. More than 70% of hospitals in conflict-affected states and 45% of health facilities in another 5 states are not working. And the remaining ones are overwhelmed with people seeking care. People are dying from a lack of access to essential services and medicines, while there is a very real risk of mass starvation in some regions. We ask you, the world's media, to continue drawing attention to Sudan and not to allow our world to forget it.
Fighting between the Sudanese military, controlled by the country's top commander and de facto ruler, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and his former deputy, General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, who leads the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, erupted in April 2023. Since then, at least 15,000 people have been killed, according to a United Nations report in April, which said that around 18 million people are also facing acute hunger. When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a rare visit to North Korea. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. The leaders of Russia and North Korea have signed a deal to help each other in case of what they described as aggression against either country. The agreement was signed during a visit to Pyongyang by the Russian president, his first visit to North Korea in 24 years.
The Russian leader was welcomed to North Korea in a lavish ceremony, including roses, waving crowds and ceremonial gunfire at a grand military parade. Footage showed tens of thousands of North Koreans lining the cleared avenues of the capital's center as a motorbike motorcade weaved through. After the ceremony, the two began talks where President Putin thanked North Korea's consistent and unwavering support for Russian policy, including in the Ukrainian direction. He announced a new fundamental document to form the basis of the two nations' relations going forward.
Today, a new fundamental document has been prepared, which will form the basis of our relations for the long term. Russian-Korean friendship has been forged under severe challenges. The feats of our predecessors are a good basis for the development of our relations today.
The two leaders last met in Russia in September 2023 and vowed to strengthen military ties. The US and South Korea accused the North of supplying Russia with artillery in exchange for food and military aid. Both countries deny this, but Putin is in search of allies since the invasion of Ukraine turned him into a pariah in the West. Both Russia and North Korea are under rafts of UN sanctions. Pyongyang since 2006 over banned nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and Moscow over the invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
The transfer by the DPRK and procurement by Russia of these ballistic missiles and other arms and related materiel are clear violations of Security Council resolutions. On May 29, the United States published analytical material showing a visual comparison of images from DPRK state media and images of missile debris from Kharkiv, confirming Russia used DPRK missiles against Ukraine.
While spreading the nonsense that the possession of arms by the defending party makes peace elusive, Russia itself continues to receive weapons from rogue states like Iran and North Korea. Pyongyang has already reportedly sent to Russia more than 10,000 shipping containers that could hold nearly 5 million artillery shells. Moreover, Russia resorts to press ganging foreign nationals into its occupation forces in Ukraine by threatening those already in Russia or deceiving those they recruit from abroad.
The visit comes as heavy fighting continues in parts of Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region, which Moscow has been trying to seize. Russian forces crossed into parts of Kharkiv region last month, and officials say they have seized about a dozen villages.
We have over 100 UN staff based in the city of Kharkiv, so I'm there quite often. And my last trip there 2 weeks ago, there were 12 sirens during the day and 12 explosions. Right? So there's a constant disruption to daily life in the city of Kharkiv. Children, and you've heard the reports, but probably you haven't gone to the schools in the metro. I have. And it's the only way children can safely study in the city of Kharkiv. And, you know, my initial reaction, when I go down with the mayor into the bowels of the metro and come across classrooms which look like regular classrooms full of children, teachers learning science, learning math, full of the the energy and enthusiasm that children have, my second thought was, but this isn't normal. It's not normal that children have to study underground.
After 28 months of war, the United Nations says the scale of humanitarian needs is vast. More than 32,000 civilian casualties, including 11,000 deaths, have been verified, but aid agencies say the real number is likely much higher.
Over in Afghanistan, in the aftermath of the Taliban's takeover, educational opportunities for girls have been restricted with a complete ban on higher education for women. The Taliban's ban on educating girls over the age of 12 recently reached 1,000 days amid global outrage and demands for the immediate resumption of children's learning.
Just over 3 years ago, Charles Zinat's future contained many possibilities. After secondary school, she was looking forward to university and then onwards striding forward into the rest of her life. But in 2021, after Taliban militants swept back into power, the prospect of university became slim.
The whole world knows that girls in Afghanistan are currently unable to attend schools or universities. They cannot continue their studies. The only way to study is to get a scholarship so they can apply abroad and continue studies there.
She was later awarded a scholarship to study abroad, but that, according to her, has fallen foul of the government's Maram rule, which requires a male relative, a father, brother or uncle to accompany her.
The law is truly unfortunate because while I succeeded in getting the scholarship, I must cover the expenses to travel with a relative by myself. The economic situation in the country is challenging and we couldn't find a solution to the problem, which has forced me to stay here.
Charles' case highlights the difficulties faced by many young women in the country. When the Taliban returned to power in 2021, the group initially said that girls would not be allowed to attend secondary schools until a new education policy, according to the principles of Islamic law and Afghan culture, was approved. However, with no plan in place to reopen secondary schools to girls, in December 2022, they extended the ban on university education for women and barred them from working in non-governmental organizations. And now the Taliban has told female civil servants barred from working that their salaries would be cut to the lowest level regardless of their experience or qualifications.
In the latest step taken to disempower women in Afghanistan, the de facto authorities have told women civil servants barred from going to work that their salaries would now be cut to the lowest level, regardless of their experience or qualifications. Following their takeover in August 2021, the Taliban said that women could return to work when the necessary conditions were in place. Almost 3 years on, they failed to clarify any timeline towards that resumption or take any meaningful steps towards allowing all women civil servants to return to work. This latest discriminatory and profoundly arbitrary decision further deepens the erosion of human rights in Afghanistan, following decisions to restrict women and girls' access to education and employment, limit their freedom of movement, and curtail their presence in public spaces, effectively entrenching the exclusion of women from public life. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, calls on the de facto authorities to rescind all laws, instructions, edicts and other measures that discriminate against women and girls, in clear violation of Afghanistan's human rights obligations.
The Taliban's regressive stance on girls' education has drawn widespread condemnation from the international community. The situation has also exacerbated the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. with aid agencies and domestic organizations facing obstacles in their operations due to the Taliban's decrees prohibiting women from working.
And that's the program today, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Teniola Uyetayo. Bye for now.